Well, here we are talking about coaching. My name is Yannick. I'm here with Nicki and Siawash, as per usual, our resident coaches. Hey, guys.
Hey.
Hey.
So today's question is, I think it's for me. Is something that I noticed, not just recently, but something that pops up quite often. Not just in my coaching, but also I'm sure in many other people's coaching rooms. And it's a question around validation. What happens if my client wants or needs validation from us? And I notice that a lot when sometimes I just kind of share thoughts when, I don't know, in supervision, I've noticed that sometimes a new coach comes in and we have a conversation, we get to know each other, I hear a bit of their story, and I just kind of acknowledge like, wow, you bring so many transferable skills in just your way of being in the room and the way that you listen and what you pick up on and the questions that you ask me and, you know, the level of awareness that you have about your own life and the dynamics between you and other people. It's really impressive. You bring a lot to the table as a coach that's going to help you so much, you know, and all of a sudden their face lights up and their whole thing changes and they're like, oh my God, that's so important for me to hear. You know, I'm not sure whether I can do this. And I've been having all these doubts and this just like really, really changed something in me. And I'm like, oh my shit, oh my God, what have I done? You know, because I don't want to be the person who I'm looked at for validation because it's a bit of a dangerous game as well, right? If I can feel somebody's craving validation, I'm hesitant to give it, even though sometimes I'm in a situation where I think, oh, I would really want to tell you how awesome you are and how much I believe in you. But if that's what you came to coaching for, that's a dangerous game because, you know, I want you to believe in yourself. I want you to know that you're good without me or anybody else having to tell you. So what do we do then? And before I keep talking, maybe just open that up and see what you think with that in the room.
Yeah, good. I think that's a very interesting discussion, and I think, you know, I can see. I mean, for me, like, so I do a mix of coaching and consulting, and I think with coaching, I personally really prefer to slow down and go a bit deeper with the client and explore where is it coming from and connect them again, create space, play with their thinking, and usually like they get to an answer and we can kind of find out where this seeking validation is coming from, right? And then sometimes with business, and actually it's very similar in business, but sometimes in business, you know, sometimes it's just more, you know, being afraid to make mistakes, right? Maybe like not wanting to make mistakes that can cost them money or trying to potentially save money, right? Even then, actually, like just saying this, like I think a lot of it is back to, right? Like a lot of it keeps coming back to that, like why? Like why is this important? Why is this question important? And I think personally,
sorry, is this when somebody's like trying to validate a business idea that they have? You mean in the business context? It's like, oh, I want to do these kind of things, and I wonder if this is going to make me money, and they're looking for your input. Is that the context?
No, actually, well, initially I was thinking about it. What came to mind is a few business scenarios where either someone is, for example, wanting to do something, whether it's start a new program or start a new service. But actually, if I come back to it, it's very similar to even just a life decision, right? Mm-hmm. And I think often, personally, just also looking at my own experience when I go to mentors and coaches. And I had an interesting conversation recently with my therapist where we talked about this. I think sometimes we replace almost like a father figure with a coach or a mentor or a parent figure, right? And sometimes it's just like we almost want to create a little bit of extra safety, right? And I think even so, actually, really sorry about that. Whether it's business, whether it's life, whatever it is, relationship, parenting, I think it's often more useful to just really slow down to see like, well, what's underneath that? What are you trying to get from this? Right? I love this question, like, especially like, you know, when we when we take time to explore like what the client really wants, like if we look at the the kind of the structure of a coaching session, often we get too quickly into the main part of the coaching. But if we take time for the takeoff, right? In ICF they describe it as a takeoff, right? And the first part of the session. If we actually take a bit more time for that, we can go a bit deeper in terms of looking at like, well, what would that look like? What would that, where is this coming from?
Yeah.
What else, right? And actually that first part can change the middle part of the conversation.
Yeah, and that's my first instinct as well when that kind of stuff comes up. It's like, ooh, look at what's happening here. That's interesting. I don't usually say those things, and now I want to. Or you're asking me to validate you or to validate your idea. Without getting sucked into that kind of game, to just notice, so what would it mean to you if I gave you validation? What would it mean to you if I were to say that's a good or not good idea? Where's that coming from? Why do you need that? And then you go deeper, right? And then you look at, get interested about where that's kind of coming from. And it opens some doors, and it can open some doors in the past, right? When you say, oh, validation, often a tendency to seek validation is often rooted in not having gotten validation from significant figures in your past, growing up, previous bosses, managers, friends, parents, and that can open some doors into something that some coaches might say, oh, but that's therapeutic. Right, but regardless of what it is, you open a door that is significant and meaningful. So you're exploring, rather than giving or not giving the validation, you get curious about what the need for validation is about, and then you might have a very different conversation to what you started with, one that might be much more important.
Yeah, really nice. I like everything that's being said, and yeah, that's what just kind of came up for me too. I was like,
thanks for the validation.
Thanks for the validation. Yeah, I was thinking like, but that's one of those questions, that risks going not dangerously, but going into that more, therapy space as well, right? If you start digging around in people's past like that. But I think in addition to everything you guys have already said, which is also where my instincts would have left to kind of confront the situation and bring it in one way or another. I mean, other than kind of explore where maybe, that need for validation would have come from, I think something that I don't know if that's particular to me, but I feel like I would feel quite strongly about is to want to kind of, whether that's explicit or kind of done without done less directly, is to try and help ask questions that allow the client to give themselves that validation. The kind of questions of like, when was a time in the past where you felt validated, or like, what are some of the things that you've done before where you've been successful? I don't know, those kind of things that help them prompt themselves about their successes and like give themselves validation on whatever the subject in question is. Yeah. So both exploring it, bringing it, being curious, because like you guys have said, I think, some gems can be uncovered. And then also hopefully, help the client find ways of giving themselves that validation.
Yeah, and it's
session and going forward. Yeah.
It's such a powerful thing to spend time with someone who is who has such an unconditional positive regard for you as a person, right? The Rogers core conditions for therapy, person-centered coaching. Like if you meet someone with, you are amazing because you are a person that's alive and breathing in the world with other people, and you're amazing just for being human. That's a validation. Right. And I know many, many coaches are very, very successful just because they unconditionally love their clients. I met a therapist once who said, my job is to love people. That's all it is, really. That's all that his therapy was about. I sit down and I love people. And when you're being loved without any conditions attached to it, that's super therapeutic. Right. So in a way, validation is about that in many ways. So when you're being met with someone, if somebody sits down with you and they think you're amazing because of all the potential that you have and that you bring and all the amazingness that human beings are, regardless of who you are, what you do, what you have done in the past, what your characteristics are, how rich you are, none of that matters, then you are being validated as a person. So being met with that kind of attitude is something super powerful. So can somebody hold that back because, they want them to feel like that without the influence of anybody else? Well, there's a good argument that no, I don't think anybody should hold that back. But if you're only giving it because the other person is craving it and you're falling into that game of they craving it, and that's why you give it. That's why I think it gets really important that we pay attention to it as coaches. Am I giving validation because I'm giving everybody validation like that? Or am I validating someone? And I don't usually do that sort of thing, right? Might there be something in the dynamic that brings this out in me because of how this person is relating to me? And some people, they just have that. They ask you a question and they look at you and they just suck all the validation and love out of you because they're really craving it, which is usually rooted in, how they like and how they've grown up and what they did and didn't have in their past. So that is important to pay attention to.
Yeah, I think that's really nice. And just adding to that, I guess, or thinking about what we talked about in our previous conversation, certainly not falling into the trap of just wanting to please, or thinking, that's what we owe the client for paying for our services or something like that. I remember we've said this before in our sessions and I've read it several times in various books, but it's obviously we're there to unconditionally support and hopefully love our clients, but it's also in another sense we're there to play more devil's advocate and not just to be paid to be their friend, right? Like we need to be in a position to confront difficult subjects in the interest of our clients' well-being and thriving.
Yeah, sorry, I got very excited because it's so true, right? When I challenge someone, it's out of love, right? When I point out that they're contradicting themselves or, that they haven't done what they said they would want to do, I'm being curious about that. It's not that I'm devalidating them. It's not that I criticize them because they're bad people. But like when I express skepticism or like, tell me how that would work. I can't see it. Then I do that because I want to understand. I mean, that's a form of validation in a way, because I'm really listening to what you're saying and I'm really taking what you said you will do seriously. And I'm taking you at face value. I believe you when you say things. But also I'm courageous enough to say, well, what you believe and what I believe, they seem to be mutually exclusive, right? So I'm not going to take away something that you believe because that's your experience. But I can say, I experience this differently, right? You see a black wall, I see a white wall. Or what was the thing with a dress that was like blue or gray, or the sneakers? It's like, I can say, oh, it's hot in here and I think it's really cold. But I can say, yes, you're right, because that's your experience. You feel it's hot in here. I don't have to say that's the truth because I want to validate you. I can say, that's right, you're experiencing that. I acknowledge that. I validate that. And also, I have a very different experience here. So they can coexist. And it's very important, I think, how we communicate that and how we put it out there, because we can validate and challenge at the same time.
Nice.
Yeah. I think, again, it comes back to how important supervision is. Talking about coaching, not supervision, but I think, I think because often in most, qualifications, coaching diplomas, they don't talk a lot about this. And I think it's almost like, when you go a bit further, because I think with some of the things you said there, I know that in the beginning I used to struggle with that, like not having the courage to bring it up or feeling that I'm going to be judgmental or I'm going to, the person is here for a certain reason, but actually it's just there's some misunderstandings around like what is the coaching really for, and also understanding understanding the concepts even better, right? Understanding like, okay, how is this actually serving the client?
Mhm.
But again, I think it's like, it might be useful for us to maybe even create something around this.
What do you mean?
Create something for coaches that, because I don't think there's a lot. Maybe there are some good books or articles around it, but I think in a few programs that I've done, I don't think there's a lot on this.
Hmm.
But I think it's a really interesting concept that I think is very common in coaching.
Yeah, because I see it a lot, and it can happen very subtly, and it can happen very overtly. And some coaches are seeing it as a very important part of their role as a coach to validate that person as a human being, or as somebody with potential, so that that person has something to believe in through them. And again, it can be a slippery slope. It can also be the most powerful thing that somebody's experienced to that point in their life.
Yeah, I think maybe maybe there's some more question. Is there a difference between validating and acknowledging someone?
Huh. Yeah, I guess it depends how you relate to that, right? So if I can acknowledge, what it would look like when you say acknowledge someone? What do you have in mind as in a coaching conversation?
Well, again, I don't know if this is more coaching, right? But I start seeing this. I read about this in a leadership book, and then when I was in America in January, Steve Hardison talked quite a bit about this. It's around like seeing the greatness in someone, but then also actually acknowledging it, meaning that like this is what I see in you, and actually talking about that, right? Yeah, and I think it's interesting because normally in pure coaching, I don't think that's part of the coaching.
Yeah.
And again, this is maybe another thing that what I've seen in leadership book, in a really good book that I read around leadership, is that and I've seen some really good coaches use this, but again, like I think it's a mix of other tools, right? I know Rich Litvin uses this. It's more around that, if you pick up something that someone is doing really well, you acknowledge it, you bring it out.
Almost like a strength, for example, right?
You spot a strength, you spot a genius. And sometimes because we limit ourselves or we limit our potential because of our experiences, but someone else acknowledges that. Someone created in you.
Yeah, and
they speak it to existence.
And that feels quite validating, right? I mean, from my positive psychology background, there's a lot of strength spotting, right? I can see when somebody's like has bravery or courage, for example, as a strength, or leadership or appreciation of beauty and excellence, kindness, love. Somebody who has that strength don't often recognize it in themselves, because for them it's just normal. That's just a normal way of being. Like, obviously, everybody is courageous because that comes very naturally to me, so I project it onto everybody else. And then somebody with prudence as a strength is like, oh, no, I really admire your courage and your bravery. And, maybe the person who's overdoing the courage and the bravery really admires someone who doesn't jump into things straight away, but actually sits down, takes time to think, really thinks things through before they act. So I can acknowledge that in someone, and in a way that's validating. That's like, I'm okay as a human being. I'm good as I am. I have my strength. And maybe I have some weaknesses, but I probably focused way too much on the weaknesses. So somebody acknowledging my strengths really validates me as a person who's okay, who's got something to offer. When somebody like what you said about like, it's a very powerful thing when you meet someone who sees some potential in you that you hadn't considered, right? If somebody sees something so great in you that, oh my God, the version of you in 6 months that I'm seeing is incredible. It's incredibly, I don't know, rich or lovable or like successful or whatever that is. It's a very powerful experience. But also it's risky because do you really see that, or what are you projecting into it, or what needs to happen for that to actually become a reality? I mean, you just met this person. So I see a lot of people suffering because somebody else saw something in them that they cannot live up to or don't want to, you know. And then depending on what the relationship is like with somebody like Steve Hardison, for example, I mean, a lot of people really look up to this guy. It's a bit of an enigma to me, but like, but that can cause a lot of suffering. Tony Robbins, similar, right? Like, there's so many people who've been painted in a future of what they could be, but for some reason or another, they don't get there, either because they don't do what's necessary to get there, or maybe it's just not available to them because something is in the way that's too big to be removed. So I don't know how I feel about that, because on the one hand, it's super powerful and I recognize that. And on the other hand, I can see it causing a lot of suffering because you are now putting something onto that person, and that, you know, you carry a lot of responsibility for sharing that kind of vision and that kind of acknowledgement.
Yeah, I think it's I like what you're saying, and I think it comes with a responsibility, right? It's not like there's a difference doing it in the first session or doing it after working together for 8 months when you really get to know someone on a deeper level, right? But I think when we look at sometimes I mean, this is a longer discussion, might go a little bit away from the actual question, but what I think I see is often in America is where, you know, the coaching often comes from there, like the world of sports, where as a coach, like, you know, I can see you can become like the best quarterback in the world, right, or in the NFL, or you can become like the next Michael Jordan. And I think like there's a difference. Like, it's funny because I got a message yesterday from someone and saying, hey, I heard I got your number. Actually, she got my number from my wife, and she's like, yeah, we need someone to come in and do a motivational talk for our staff. We have 25 people in here. And I was like, I'm not a motivational speaker. I think like sometimes it's almost as there's a mix of that American culture that comes in from sports, right, with what coaching is, pure coaching is. And I'm not saying that's wrong. Sometimes people mix different types of coaching and tools of transformation. But again, I think maybe just like there's probably like a mix here that's happening.
Nicki, what are you thinking?
I think my reflections on that note were just kind of, I think I like the idea of dreaming big with people and kind of, you know, encouraging seeing their potential and helping them to see their potential. But when it comes to, you know, when we said, well, that can be risky, what if they don't succeed? You know, I think the validation element that is possible to give for me probably rests more in present, like in the present, you know, things that have already happened or known about them. So like by divorcing it from the, you know, the possibility of whether it will or won't happen, then that validation is sincere and doesn't risk causing any damage because it's not attached to the outcome, but you still support them in dreaming and to some extent probably getting more validation sorry, by also kind of acknowledging their potential.
Yeah, right, because the validation is something that comes from the client that then they ask us to validate. It's not something that we share because we see something that they don't see. I think that's a very different thing, right? So I think you're right, Siawash, we kind of drifted a little bit, but it's a form of that, right? That kind of acknowledgement. So I like what's being created here. But like, it really clear to me that, you know, when it's about validation, it's about something that like, here's my dream. What do you think? Not here's what I see in you. Here's my dream for you as a client.
Yeah.
And then they can, you know, choose to reject that or be inspired by it.
Yeah.
I'm done. How about you guys?
Yeah, I think that's the good place to end. And again, you know, like, I'd love to hear what the listeners are getting from this and also what their ideas are. I think this is really fun. I think we have 55 episodes now, right? Or
something like that.
I'm getting personally a lot out of this. So
yeah.
Yeah, likewise, for sure.
And We're talking about coaching. This is not just the three of us talking about coaching. I mean, it was always meant to spark conversations. And I'm always delighted when I hear what kind of conversations this sparked outside of our room here. I know from, various people that it sparked something. But the more you share what this has sparked, the more other people can engage in that conversation. Right. So the more we talk about coaching, the more we learn about coaching, the better coaches we are and the better coaching our clients receive. I think it has a huge generative impact. So if this has sparked a thought, and I think this episode particularly went into a bunch of different directions and opened up a lot of doors. So I'd love to know what doors it opened for you. And maybe you have a bit more time than me right now to kind of freely spend some time behind some of those doors. I wish I could. I wish I would choose to just make an hour of time after every time we talk, because it opens up a lot of thinking space. So yeah, thanks for that, guys, and thanks for you listening, watching. Thank you for being with us today. I appreciate your commitment to learning and growing as a coach. Just a few things before you go. First of all, we're doing this for you, so if there's anything you'd like us to talk about, do send us a question. Secondly, we're not doing this for profit, so we rely on your support to help us reach as many coaches as we can. So if you can send this episode to a friend or tell a fellow coach about what we're doing here, maybe you can subscribe or leave us a review, or even support us on Patreon. That would be amazing. And lastly, you can find us across all major platforms. So whether you like to watch or you like to listen or you like to download episodes and listen to it in your car while you're driving through somewhere with no internet, you can do so too. And that's it from us. Thank you, and I hope to see you next time.